This is GST 8138, Customization and Modeling, Module 9 lecture on the ArcPro SDK. I'm your instructor, Robert Hewlett, and you can contact me via the email address below. The general learning outcome is to master, know, and understand all content and concepts discussed in lab, lecture, and the assigned readings. Specific learning outcomes, although not an absolute list, describe the ArcPro SDK, distinguish ArcPro SDK resources. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of add-ins in ArcGIS, distinguish ArcPro add-ins. Are they the same? Are they different? Are they less? Are they more? Distinguish ArcPro SDK project types. That gives you kind of a spoiler alert there. Describe the IDE called Visual Code, and describe the IDE called Visual Studio. So we're going to get started with the ArcPro SDK. Okay, so what I want you to do is pause this presentation, and open up, watch this video from the Dev Summit from 2020. So this would have been right around spring break time. So this is Wolf, that's the guy in the picture there. You'll hear him on other videos as well. He does a really good one where he has two scenes side by side. One's bird's eye view. You can see the helicopter, animated helicopters flying based on some tracking information, and then a 3D view from a helicopter cockpit. So pause my video and watch Wolf, and then we can come back and talk. So some of the highlights would be around 120. They're using Visual Studio 2017-2019, right? And so they're not using VS Code, right? So you might see in my demos in the past me using VS Code to do Python stuff. Okay, so this is right now only available in the full, the other development tool that Microsoft has, one of the core development tools, Visual Studio. It's been around for a while. Okay, and when they talk about add-ins, configurations, and plugins, and we're going to find out that there might be a little bit more in 2.5, or they've separated some things out. Okay, so Wolf's demo, it's a two 3D tabs, 3D and 3D tabs, async and tracking. So it's calling asynchronous layers. They're tracking the helicopters in one bird's eye view, and then they're looking out, setting the camera so that you're looking out the window of one of the lead helicopter, or might be the one in behind. I'm not sure. It's one of them in that, but it's dealing with a real-time tracking layer that updates the position of the helicopters on the map. In that. Right, so it's an asynchronous architecture. There's lots of asynchronicity in ArcPro. That's because you don't want to tie up the interface while things, if there's some geoprocessing happening in the background, you can still interact with the interface, or if some other task is taking a long time, it doesn't, in Android terms, in mobile development, they call it janking, right, where the interface locks up or something. This feels non-responsive. So they use the asynchronous architecture a lot in this particular application, right? There's this concept of a subscription loop, especially if it's real-time data or tracking data. So that what it means is there's new data coming in. So you kind of subscribe to the data source to get updates, and then you have new data coming in. What happens? You have data that gets deleted, say like an emergency response system where you have new calls coming in, but once a call's been handled or resolved, then it goes off the screen. It's not active anymore. In that, so this whole subscription loop and a concept of subscribing to a stream layer or a real-time feature layer. And we even saw a thing like a real-time row cursor, right? And it's all about non-blocking I/O. So this asynchronous concept up here, get my little laser pointer. So this asynchronous architecture is all about non-blocking. Non-blocking is really big in the industry, especially for websites. That's where a product called Node.js comes into play a lot. Non-blocking I/O, and that speeds up website. So if one user is making the site busy, he doesn't knock everyone out, or everyone has to wait for them. It's about processing multiple users at once, or processing multiple chunks of data at once, right? And so they have these real-time row source. We saw a get shape in there where they were getting the geometry and that sort of thing, probably to update the center of the view. Okay. This is another video Okay, Wolf's was short. This is out of a technical session. It might have been from the San Diego conference. Nope, Palm Springs it says. But it's more of a full breakdown of the SDK. I think you might hear them say 2.3. That's and that we've already had two versions since then with lots of new additions. Okay, so pause my video, watch this one. You can watch it at twice the speed, right? Down the little cogwheel, you can watch it a little bit faster if you want. So I just want to talk about some of the video highlights. Okay, so they talk about patterns again. They mentioned the three common ones that have been in the SDK for a while. Okay, plugin would be one, add-in is another. There's a couple more that are showing up. Core, metadata, and that we're going to go over all of them shortly. So don't worry. But I think as the SDK, as they release new versions of Arc Pro, then there's going to be new patterns every time they release an SDK. That's just going to grow, right? So one thing is that the SDK is always synced with a current version of Pro. So if you're a version behind and go get the latest SDK, you're going to be in trouble, right? That happened to me. I had to upgrade to 2.5 to actually play with the SDK. Okay, really important to get your versions all lined up. There is an installation guide and that. At around 520. Okay, community samples on GitHub. I've gone there, I've downloaded them, played around with them. In that, perfect. No, there's usually some tweaking you have to do. You'll see when I do demos, you'll see me tweaking stuff to get it running. In that, there's community sample data. That's a big thing. A lot of the samples need data because it's GIS, right? Data risk. In that, so you need to probably download that ahead of time and get all that organized. Okay. There's a pro concept guide. It's probably a pretty important thing to go through to get a handle on what the heck is asynchronous architecture and what are real-time, what are layer streams and all these things, right? Real-time cursors and that. So things in there, plus the 2 and 3D. So it's a complex product because it does a lot. Okay, so it's really important to maybe sit down, take the time, sit down and read about some of these concepts. When you have good energy and that kind of stuff, because you might demystify some of the weirdness that you might see in the product. Why are things the way they are? There's a config.daml file, desktop application markup language or something like that. I think this is an ESRI thing. The more I dug into it, it really feels like something ESRI made for their desktop development. I can't be sure on that. But the more I dig, it really looks like it's theirs. When you create add-ins and that sort of thing, you get this ESRI add-in X file, right? So this is one thing you're learning in this course, all these extensions, right? All these different extensions for toolboxes, for sharing projects and that, and the project itself. There's lots of new extensions so that when you see data on disk, it's important for you as a GS person to, hey, I know what that is. That's an important file. Don't delete it, right? Start in Visual Studio starts Arc Pro. It's a little start button. So when you build a solution and you build it and you want to test it and run it, debug it, that kind of stuff, when you hit start, you're probably going to start Arc Pro, especially if you've done an add-in. Okay, some of them don't need to start Arc Pro, just so you know. But from that video, that's what was happening, right? And it was a construction tool demo. And so what they did is they made like a custom construction tool. And that would be, what does that mean? That means editing. So if you're going to be editing a feature, you can be adding features to a particular feature class, then you can come up with your own little custom construction tool. I think what it is they were stamping in the area in hectares or an acreage or acres. Right, so that might be part of an old land management information system that has to be part of the legal description or part of the database. Except that's not if your projections in square meters, then you are going to have to calculate that. But the idea is that instead of doing some field calculator later on, as you capture the feature, you can get that calculated. What I saw in there was a lot of hand bombing of code in this .daml file. Okay. So this desktop application markup language. So a lot of the things about the pane and the name of the pane or a tool and the name of the tool and the tooltip of the tool, and maybe even the images or the icons that the tool uses. That's all done in this XML file, and that's not unusual. Lots of languages do that today. They separate out the code, or some people call the back-end code, from the front-end interface. And there could be not just a clear separation. There could be multiple layers in between those areas, and so the user interface is described in this XML language in a separate file, and the code in behind that reacts to someone clicking on a button is, in this case, for ArcPro SDK and Visual Studio, is C#. And a good breakdown of resources on about 2020. So let's talk about that. There is the landing page in that, tutorials, concepts, links to GeoNet videos and blogs, right? We'll bring that up. That's in here, right? This is the getting started tutorials. These are the concepts down here. That series of videos, some of them might even link into some of the ones that we're watching as well. Especially some of these look very familiar to me. And then there's the blog, what's coming, that sort of stuff, or new things that just got added that you might want to try out. So this is a great place to start. But again, there's lots of stuff. But don't get lost in all the content. Little bite-sized pieces. There's a doc wiki, right? Where you can get more information. Might as well check it out. The community samples and that sort of thing. That actually doesn't feel like the doc wiki. I might have a broken link that I'll fix. Let's get back here. This would be the documentation wiki here. No, okay, so they have, the samples are on GitHub, and so is the documentation. That might have threw me off there. So both the documentation and the samples are up on GitHub for you to download in that. Okay. And so a little bit about, we'll come back to this later in the lecture, all these different types of items that you can add. You got community samples. There's two things on community samples. Some of the samples need the data, right? So you'll have the like a Visual Studio project, upload it there. But then that project, when it's running, might need certain data set that you test against it. And that's on the samples, so you have to get that data downloaded as well. So setting up the environment, I'm just going to go over what I did. Okay, so have just some advice for me. Have a dir for samples and testing. You might as well add on this for the data, right? Maybe I'll throw that in later, but definitely have a directory for where the data is as well. You have to have ArcPro already installed, okay, before you do the SDK part. So one is to think about how you want to structure all of your stuff. Where's my data going to be? Where are my sample solutions going to be? And we're going to be testing and all that kind of stuff. You need to have ArcPro installed in that. And again, because the SDK is at it's a 2.5 SDK, you have to be in ArcPro 2.5. Okay. Then you can install Visual Studio. I installed, there's lots of versions, but I installed, and you'll see this in my demos later on, I'm using the Visual Studio Community Edition 2019. Its real version is 16.2.2. Okay. With, right, the .NET Desktop Development Workload, right? And also the .NET Framework 4.8. Now, some samples from the tutorial page use a 4.6 and change .NET Framework. All the ArcPro 2.5 and therefore the 2.5 SDK use the 4.8 framework. Okay, so set up your directories, got to have Pro installed, then install Visual Studio. Okay, and I got a screenshot coming up to show you what I checked on when I did the install. Then once Visual Studio is installed and up and running from the marketplace, you go to extensions, manage extensions, search for ArcGIS. I added the .NET SDK for .NET, the .SDK utilities. You got to have this because a lot of the links, a lot of the projects are pointing to an install of ArcPro wherever that person installed it and the SDK where they installed it. So where you install your stuff might be completely different. And so it'll fix all those references for you. Really important. Really, really important. And there was a metadata toolkit I threw in there. I just think it's an extra set of libraries for reading and writing metadata. Okay, so those are the ones that I installed for the demo purposes. Okay, so when I'm installing Visual Studio, this is what the page looks like to me. I'm going to get my laser. So the big thing was desktop development, right? It can do other development like mobile in that, but because Arc Pro is a desktop tool, make sure you're in there. You can also do Node.js, I mentioned before, and Python, but stick to this, C#, and that kind of stuff. Because Arc Pro is a desktop tool built on top of the .NET framework, so you want to be here. Now the key thing is that you want this 4.8 development tools installed. Okay, so you got to check this box off. It's not checked by default. Some of the older tutorials, probably from the 2.4 SDK, are pointing to, I think it's a 4.6.2.1. So don't install it, but you just got to update it, and you'll see me do that in subsequent demo videos. Okay, so .NET Desktop Development, check that, and check 4.8. The only reason I say don't check, I'm going to say this for the first time. The reason I say don't check everything is that just those two things checked, it's a 5 gig install. It's a big one. And the more stuff you check on, it gets big fast. Okay, and that sort of thing. But those are the to play around with the SDK for Arc Pro. Definitely .NET Desktop Development and the 4.8 to match the framework that Arc Pro is currently using. And you know, if you're down the road, say you're on Arc Pro 2.6, 2.7 or something like that, it's probably going to be changing. So you'll have to find out what all those latest things are. Okay. So again, these are the two important areas. Once Visual Studio fires up for the first time, I didn't show it. There's a thing like continue without code, and then I just go up to the extension manager, manage extensions, search for ArcGIS, right, and install or select. You end up clicking download on these three, and then it installs them after. That you definitely need the Arc Pro SDK, right? Utilities really helps if you're going to bring one of the samples down, because usually it's got broken links in it. It doesn't know where they installed the SDK in Arc Pro was different from where you installed SDK in Pro, and it needs to find both and fix their references. So you definitely, if you're going to be running some of the samples, you're going to need that extension added. And you may not need the metadata toolkit. It's very specific, but it is a thing that is close to my heart. Because when you're managing a large data warehouse or spatial data warehouse, and you have hundreds or thousands of data sets, if you don't have good metadata, it gets really cumbersome. It gets out of control really fast in that. So I'm going to talk about Visual Studio Code. So why not VS Code, right? That's the one you were using before, someone's going to tell me, right? So why not VS Code? So what is VS Code? Okay, so it's free open source multi-platform code editor. So it's free and open source. That's different than Visual Studio Code. It's a much bigger IDE, and to get the full-fledged version beyond community does cost money. In that, but this one is multi-platform, right? That Visual Studio is just for Windows, but we can build web applications. But where the box that you developing on is a Windows machine. VS Code can run on Linux and Mac and other systems, right? So this is right off of their page when you go to VS Code, right? The one I've done in previous examples, right? So it's a code editor refined and optimized for building and debugging modern web and cloud applications. It has Node.js built right into it. It really has some JavaScript's root to it, and it's been extended for other languages, right? Big thing though, multi-platform, Linux, Mac, very different than Visual Studio. Okay, definitely has roots in web applications. JavaScript, right? So if you're doing web applications, you're doing JavaScript. You're not doing C#, which is what is being used in the Arc Pro SDK. You're not doing Python, all that kind of stuff. You're doing typically JavaScript. Now VS Code's been extended for other languages, right? But its roots are definitely JavaScript. Like I said, when you do an install of VS Code, you go to the help about and get all the version information. It will tell you exactly what version of Node.js is built in as well. It has been extended for other languages such as Python and QML. You can even do Java in it too if you want. Just keep adding more extensions, right? So Visual Studio, right, right, has a community version, but it has also a enterprise version, professional version in that. It's mainly for Windows. So mainly, right, what you're doing mainly, Vista, Windows 9, Windows 10 desktop development using the .NET framework. Now you could be building, you might see that, well, you can also use it for Node development, and you can also use it for Python development as well in that. But a lot of people like the VS Code because, one, it's free and open source, and it works on their Mac or it works on the Ubuntu Linux box in that. But Visual Studio, its roots are really in the Microsoft world, really about you on a Microsoft machine developing Microsoft desktop applications, although it has been extended for other areas. That's what its roots are. Okay, and some, that should be ASP. ASPX. So that would be doing web pages in Microsoft Internet Information Server. We're using either .NET or C# in the background to basically run the code for the site. So we'll flip gears here. Add-ins in ArcMap. So I just want to review. We've talked about this before, right? So add-ins in ArcMap at all. So that means like ArcScene, ArcToolbox, ArcGlobe, that suite of products, the 10.x, I guess, 10.7, 10.8, right? So what is an add-in? So typically a deeper integration with the GUI of ArcMap at all. So ArcScene, ArcPro, ArcToolbox. Not ArcPro, sorry. Just ArcScene, ArcToolbox, ArcCatalog, ArcGlobe, all those ones. Okay. So menus, commands, toolbars, tools, extensions with the event model. Supported languages, VB.NET, C#, Java, right, and Python. So again, menus, commands, and tools and tools bars. Maybe you can tie into some of the event models, the event model of when a document opens, when a feature is added, changed, updated, that sort of stuff. And you can develop in these languages. And depending, you used a wizard to do the Python stuff. You could use Eclipse to do the Java, and you'll be using probably Visual Studio, right? The product that I'll be demoing in this lecture. Visual Studio using either VB.NET or C#, right? And there was a config XML to specify the interface. So what was the name of the toolbar? What tools was on a toolbar? What image was a toolbar using? That was all done in this config.xml file. Right, and then there was some Python file that was referenced in that config.xml file to say, okay, when someone clicks a button, go to this .py file and run this code. So add-ins in ArcPro, how are they different? Right, that's the thing we want to talk about in that. So not just add-ins in ArcPro, right? So it's not about just doing an add-in. Okay, so what can you do? You can do many things. You can do a managed configuration. Okay, so what that means is when ArcMap starts up and you want a very customized experience, you can change the splash screen, you can turn off all the ribbons and stuff like that and have a very customized, tailored view for your users. People may not even realize that they're in ArcPro. There's no ArcPro branding. You can change all of it. But ArcPro is running, you just can't tell that you're in the product. Okay, core host application, it's what I usually call a headless one, or you're not using the ArcPro GUI to get GUI stuff done, right? So maybe I just need something at the command line that's going to mess around with some file geodatabases, right? Or some other type of Esarai data in that, but I'm not going to be displaying it, or I'm not going to be printing it, or if I'm going to be printing it, I'm going to put it right into PDF, so I don't really need it flashed up on the screen, right? Great tools you can write that run in the middle of the night and do a bunch of work for you. Okay, a plugin, it's usually a new data source. Okay, so the thing they call plugin is plugging in a new data source. Okay, so ArcPro might be out there. There might be a new data format, I think like vector tiles in protocol buffers or something like that. And they might be like, well, we can do vector tiles and we can do all this other stuff, but we haven't really written the code for protocol buffers. And you're like, well, we need it tomorrow, and I can't wait. So maybe you can find a library that can bring it in and flip it into a format that Esarai can understand. right? Or you're getting some data off a drone or something, and it's a very specific text format or XML format that you need to flip. So it doesn't come in smoothly or directly, or there isn't a geoprocessing tool that you can use. And so you can build your own. Okay, so that's 3 so far. Module add-in. So the classic add-in that we saw in the ArcMap era, we also can do in the ArcPro era. Okay, and also a metadata toolkit that you can actually build an application that focuses on metadata. Okay, and that. So there's a managed configuration. 1, core host application. 2, could be headless. It might, or a separate GUI, like just a raw .NET user interface versus using the user interface components that ArcPro has. A plugin for a new data source. Traditional add-in that we've seen in ArcMap. So that's going to be, because we're in the ribbon, that would be like a new tab on the ribbon, new tools on a tab within a ribbon, maybe a new content pane, right? So we have all these different panes that come up all the time, like the content pane or the catalog pane or the label properties pane. So you design your own pane and have your own elements on it. Supported languages, just VB and C#. So no Java, no Python. No Python yet. We'll see what happens. We'll see. It would be interesting. So managed configuration provides you with the ability to customize the startup user interface for ArcPro, create a custom splash screen, create a start page, right? Or an about page, but all custom. Right, so these would be, you could override what is there in ArcPro. Even use conditional logic and user roles to tailor the overall user experience. So depending how you've logged in, say to the enterprise or something, that, you know, is this a regular user? Is this an editor? Is this more of an administrator? And give them a different perspective, different windows open, different panes available to them. So what you can do is pause my video lecture and watch demo 1 from the playlist. The actual code for the sample can be found at this hyperlink. So what's Core Host? Provide you with the ability to work headless. So you don't need a GUI if you don't want one. Build command line tools, right? So it's like you're at CMD or at the PowerShell doing things. Like I said, these are great for having something happen in the middle of the night. So while you sleep, data gets processed and fired into the warehouse. Fantastic stuff. So work with file geodatabases or other data stores. You can look at a project file, extract out, task items or what a toolbox is, what's in there, and that sort of thing. But you're like, look, I don't need it thrown up on the screen. I just need a listing, right? Work with geometry. So if you can get at the data in the file geodatabase, you can get at its geometry and do things with it. So you don't always need a GUI to get the job done or a user interface. And so because as soon as you have one of those, someone has to click on it. So who's going to wake up in the middle of the night and click on something, right? Or you can build your own GUI using like stock.NET controls. So you don't want to use the ones out of the ArcPro framework, right? You want to use some stock.NET controls, but still get at that ability to open up a file geodatabase, see what feature classes are in there or what tables are in there. Or a streamlined interface. There's a lot of stuff going on in Pro, and maybe you don't want something as well bloated, right? Or you just dislike the ArcPro interface. So no, not like that, like this. So what you can do now is pause my video lecture and watch the demo 2, okay, for the Core Host demo. So we're going to talk about plugin. So what does a plugin do? Provide you with the ability to consume file formats that are not supported yet in ArcPro. GeoCSV that describes the geometry with well-known text, right? Simple format. Not an easy way to get it into ArcPro right now, right? Or consume file formats that are supported poorly. Maybe it is supported, but it's like 20 clicks on the interface. You're like, enough of that. I got to streamline that for my users. So what you can do now is pause my video lecture and watch demo number 3, where I demo the plugin, which brings in a series of CSV files. Talk about the add-in. So this is the classic, right? Provide you with the ability to add tabs to the ribbon, add tools, commands to existing ribbons or existing tabs, add new panes, and more as well. There's quite a few items that you can mess around with. What you can do now is pause my video lecture and watch my demo number 4, where I demo an add-in. There's also a metadata pattern, so provide you with the ability to view metadata, update metadata, add metadata, depending on the what you choose to do. Search metadata would be another one too, but it's getting at that metadata, right, and that sort of thing. So what you can do now is pause my video lecture and watch the demo number 5 out of the playlist. And it's a simple, it's done as an add-in, but it needs a special library, the metadata.dll library, added to your project so that it can get at the metadata in the ArcPro project. So what you can do is, again, pause my video lecture and watch this one from Esri. Twice the speed is what I would suggest. It's Wolf. He's the one who did the helicopter demo earlier in that. And so they go over, this is sort of an intermediate customization, get a lot more into the DAML files, get a lot more into a little bit of code and that sort of thing in that. Okay, now that we're back, go over some of the highlights, right? So it's Wolf again and Uma, right? And so they talk a little bit about the MVVM pattern, right? Model view, view model in that. What that effect is on you is that there's a whole bunch of files. There are .xaml files, XAML files. There's DAML files, DML files, and then there's other files that have your code, right? And so there's all these different files which give you those different layers of separation, right? They start off with the concept of map tools. So if you want to make a tool that works with a map, then you have to create a tool that descends from the map tools object and then use item templates to build that up. A lot of callback things going on because it's an asynchronous environment. So you say, hey, go do this, call me back on this function. And that way you don't have you don't block each other, right? The one thing where he did the, because there's so much asynchronous things going on, right? Firing off at the same time, running at their own speed, that in his demo, he needs the zoom to happen, then the things to be refreshed, and then the selection set to be displayed. Okay, so he actually has to queue them up. Queue task run is a method he used to make sure that that sequence, because everything's asynchronous, that actually no, at this point in time, I need you to follow a certain sequence. Make sure the zoom is completed before you redraw the selection set. So that's kind of interesting. Advanced control, he goes in a little bit deeper into MVM at that point, making a control. Dockable pane example with the XAML and DAML files again. And then the question is, well, where do I do something, right? That sort of stuff. The DAML files really seem to be, like I said, an ESRI thing. And the XAML files are stock Visual Studio.NET method of describing an interface for an application. Also, a little bit, he gets deeper into the MVVM concepts, the UI versus the code behind layers, right? So those multiple layers of the UI, the XAML and the DAML, and then also how you can reference out. There's even a double jump between, hey, I'm an iTool, what kind of iTool are you? And then you get to your code that does it. So there's a bunch of things that can be swapped out on the fly in model view model systems in that. And that's what we do over time, is that we insert all these layers in between applications, and even when we're developing applications, to make it easier to swap things out. Also, he got a little bit deep, 29 minutes in, on the DAML ID. And you can almost start to see that when we were doing task items in the first lab, and we would use the record tool, and we would click on a command, and that would, do a zoom in or let us select features. Basically, what that record tool is doing is grabbing that DAML ID, So every command in Arc Pro has a unique name, and you can grab that name, and that's part of what gets recorded for the action in a task step. So you can start to see where that starts to tie in, and some of this makes sense. Also, that the Arc Pro is multi-threaded, but then there's an issue that when you have threads running at the same time and they're trying to access the same object on different threads, that you can have conflicts, so you can lock them out, right? Blending themes, now that you can have light themes and dark themes in Arc Pro, so you can run Pro in either way. You also need to maybe flip out your icons to have a lighter themed icons and darker themed icons so that it makes sense, right? What was interesting and related to your final project is when Uma takes over and does some layout examples, right? And especially at the 50-minute mark there, she gets into all the create. And so what we're dealing with is that we can't create those elements, right? That we can only work with existing. But when you're working in the SDK, you can actually start with a blank layout, actually no layout, make the layout a certain size, and then start creating all the mapping frames, the legends, and all that. Whereas when we were doing it, we had to have all that made in advance. And she gets a little bit into a map series. Map series are probably something you'll always, if you have a long JS career, you're going to run into having to do one of these probably. And so some of the concepts here might help you solve that problem. One thing that you saw him a lot in the video was he go into item templates. And so what we'll do is we'll just hop in here and take a look in that. And so some of these are big chunks, like the ArcGIS Pro add-in template, right? The configurations template, the plugin template, the core host template. The one that's in here, probably not listed, is a metadata template. So those are like big chunks. They have many of the controls coming up, okay? But they have these like backstage tabs, but these are specific to Arc Pro, things that you find in Pro. So backstage tabs, buttons, a button palette. Hey, that was one of the first tutorials when you were building a task item. Combo boxes, constructions tools, that's one of the demos from the videos. Custom control, custom item, custom project item, right? So this is making things show up in the content panes that Arc Pro doesn't have yet, right? So one thing that's been added since 2.4 to 2.5 are notebooks. So notebooks are a new project item that shows up. So when you open up that catalog, I guess it's a catalog pane, and you see the toolbox listed and the databases listed and the folders, and there's no task items until you insert one, and you're not going to see any notebooks till you get to 2.5. But that's where you start to see, well, if I want something to show up there, a project item, right? A new thing. Then that's where you go. Dockable panes, so all your content panes, most of your symbol class panes, all that kind of stuff are dockable panes, right? I like this one. The dock pane with the burger icon. That's the little 3 slots that does a menu that flies out in that, right? Drop handles, embeddable controls, gallery controls, all that kind of stuff. Map tools. So if you need to click on the map, drag a bounding box or something and select some features or something, or do an identify. If you need a tool that needs to interact with the map canvas that somehow and get some real world coordinates of where the user clicked, then you're definitely designing a map tool. And also if you need to add a menu in that, property sheets and that sort of thing, and split buttons as well. So but just notice that these are all Arc Pro widgets. So these aren't stock Visual Studio.net form widgets. These are ones that Arc Pro has looked. And so if you use these, then your pane, your tool, your property sheet will have a Arc Pro look already to it. Okay, so these are some of the things that you can start adding to Pro, and then you start to say, okay, well, I've seen the docking panes, I've used those. That's like contents and the catalog pane, and I've used mapping tools to select features, and I've used construction tools to build when I'm editing, and I've seen buttons like and that as well. Okay, and they're up in the ribbon, so you're clicking on them a lot in that, and you've seen the tabs as well for the map and for the scene and for reports and a few other things too. So let's get back to the lecture. Almost done.
So if you need to re-examine a topic or need clarification on a term or concept, or maybe you just have questions, you can get an answer by posting a note on one of the discussion boards for this course. This concludes this lecture.
So extended time. What do I have for you today? So more about SDK reflections. The DAML thing, the desktop application markup language. I'll do some more digging for the last lecture to make sure we clarify who is that .NET or ESRI. It really feels like ESRI right now. But you have to be comfortable with hand bombing an XML file. So a lot of stuff about the ribbon, what a group is called, what a tool name is, its tooltip, and that sort of thing is written in that file. So you have to get down there and write it, and you have to be comfortable in there between all the XML tags. Okay. It's a good idea to read about application patterns, right? So if you have a bout of insomnia, right, then start looking at application patterns. No pattern is often called spaghetti code, that the code for the interface is mixed in with the code with the interface. It's one big blob. There's something called MVC, Model View Controller. I might go into detail of this, into more details about this in the next lecture. Model View Presenter, which is one that showed up in this. It's an adjustment to MVC, but usually it's for the web. And then there's the MVVM, so the one you see from Microsoft, Model View View Model, right? So what it is just more layers, more letters, more layers, right? And what it does is it helps, a lot of these, once you do MVC, MVP, MVVM, you're definitely separating data, code, and the view. It's just on the view, how many layers of separation are you going to have? There's also Model View Delegate, which is used in the Qt runtime, which is also used in App Studio, ESRI, for building mobile applications and using the runtimes. And it's closest to MVVM, but it's out of the Qt world, and so they just have their own opinions on it. When you look at these patterns, it kind of helps you understand why things are structured the way they are. So why do I have these DAML files? Why do I have the XAML files? Why is my code over here in that? So when you build these bigger applications, there's a big separation between the data, the logic for manipulating the data, and then how we view, another separation of how we're going to view that on the screen. Okay, and so in the end, there are reasons why we do this. Because the spaghetti code pattern, although it gets you through on a particular project, it doesn't scale up over time into building a larger application that gets extended by other people. Right? That's all for now.